Hi guys, I welcome you all to the next lecture in our anthropology series. So today we have started our new topic, that is 9.5, the chapter 9.5, wherein we are going to study about the concept of race, racism, racial classifications, all of that. So racial classifications and all we will cover, we'll start covering them from tomorrow. Today we are going to cover race and the concept of racism. Fine. So you can see these are people from, you can say, different continents and different skin colors like that. So you need to understand that this concept of racism came from the concept of race. So first we should know what race is all about, right? So if we have to define race, this concept of race came around, you can say, the mid 20th century, and it was viewed from two perspectives. Okay, the first one was the evolutionary perspective. जैसे हम we were studying about the human evolution from the animal kingdom, ठीक है, how different species evolved, ठीक है, how the homo concept came in, ठीक है. So this evolutionary assumption was further, because we see that all over the globe when we see humans, though we all belong to one homo sapien species, but then also there is a lot of, you can say, phenotypic variation that is there, right? So to understand that evolutionary perspective, how these changes were there in humans, that was one perspective, where the idea or the assumption that geographical distribution plays an important role in the race formation. That means जब हम evolution पढ़ रहे हैं, and when we are saying that okay, different places people have certain different phenotypic characteristics, right? So this idea that geography, maybe geographical distribution, plays a part in the race formation was the first perspective. The second was of the importance of breeding population. That means जब हमने Mendelian population बोला था, हमने क्या बोला था? It is a isolated endogamous group. That means a group that does mating only amongst themselves, and it is isolated. That means वहाँ पे कोई migration का concept does not play a part. So this Mendelian population is a population that has a collection of common traits which set the groups apart. So same concept उन्होंने race में भी लगाया कि they said that maybe race जो है ना, it is also like a inbreeding population where there are common traits among the groups, and this common traits set them different from the other group. For example, we talk about the Negroes. Okay, who are the Negroes? Negroes are the people, you can say, who inhabit the mostly African continent, some part of, you can say, other places also, ठीक है ना, थोड़ा African equatorial climatic zone का हो गया, right? And then there is a population of Caucasoids जो थोड़े से who are little white in color, right? You can say American European populations because temperate region में रहते हैं, right? So what is this? This is that उन्होंने बोला they have, Negroes have certain common traits among themselves which are different or which make them different from the Caucasoid groups. Example के लिए, for example, their skin tone would be mostly dark because of the equatorial character of the race, right? But फिर भी there is a differentiation and there is a common pool of traits, right? जो हम racial classification, when we read the racial classifications na, then we see what are the common characteristics on which we judge the races and how they make different classification based on those. So we saw what two perspectives were there कि evolution में how, you know, the concept of racism fits, because क्या है, if we are all homo sapiens, then why is there any kind of a differentiation in us, right? So this was the, and anthropologists were a lot intrigued to know the variations that are there in the humans. So that was purely a biological kind of a study. It had nothing to do with any sort of a racial discrimination or prejudice per se, right? So scholars such as Hutton, Dobbs-Hansky have mentioned their definitions that these breeding or Mendelian populations can change in time and are not like watertight compartments. And also, when these anthropologists were studying these groups, they were aware of the fact that these are merely certain changes, okay, For example, a person from Africa starts to live in a European nation. Over time, maybe his skin color becomes a lot lighter, right? And if he has a if he mates with a American girl and marries American girl and has a child, ठीक है ना, his daughter or son maybe would not have the typical African characters. So these are not watertight compartments, right? So this race is not a watertight compartment, and they were very aware of this fact. Now let's try and define the concept of race. So there are different definitions that are given by different people. I'll just tell you one or two. Like Boyd, he said that race is a population which differs significantly from the other human population in regard of the frequency of one or more of the genes it possesses. That means what वो क्या बोल रहा है, there is a group of population, these are two groups of population, इनके पास कुछ और frequency of genetic, they have a genetic frequency and they have a genetic frequency which differ from each other, obviously, because if there is a genotypic variation, that will ultimately show us the phenotypic variation that we are talking about, right? So this is what Boyd says. Then there was Dobzhansky. He also defined race as a group of population which are reproductively isolated. तो कहीं पे ये Mendelian population का idea आ गया. That means they are reproductively isolated to the extent that exchange of genes between them is absent or negligible. ठीक है? So this was the definition given by Dobzhansky. Then there is a definition by Mayer, who says that he tried to define the concept of race as a subspecies. So you can say that Homo sapien is a species, ठीक है? And उसके अंदर there are concept like subspecies. That means जो genetic variation है या जो आप कह लो racial variation है, he defined कि he said that this racial variation can be equated to a subspecies kind of a concept. So he said a subspecies is an aggregate of phenotypically similar people. That means सारे white एक जैसे हैं, ठीक है? All Indians, you can say Indian or Indian South Asian type के लोग एक जैसे हैं, ठीक है? So a subspecies what? Aggregate of phenotypically similar population, ठीक है? Inhabiting a geographical subdivision, ठीक है? Which differ taxonomically from the other population. That means अगर हम पूरा Indian subcontinent ले लें तो मोस्टली इंडियन सबकॉन्टिनेंट के लोग एक जैसे दिखते हैं, ठीक है? इंडियन, पाकिस्तानीज, भूटानीज, नेपालीज, ऑब्वियसली वी हैव मतलब बांग्लादेशीज, यू कैन से अ सिमिलैरिटी है, श्रीलंकन्स, वी ऑल हैव अ सिमिलर काइंड ऑफ अ phenotype, right, which differs from that maybe of a American continent, right? So this is how he explained the concept. So even though everybody is saying that there are differences in the genotypes or maybe phenotypes, but there is a, उन्होंने सबने माना एक point पे, they all understood that geography has a role to play in the racial classification. अगर आप races को define कर रहे हो तो geography, where you are born, ठीक है ना, that places local environment has a lot of role to play, and there is a role of common ancestry. That means genetics का भी there is a role to play. That means they said कि दो चीज़ें हैं, one is the environment and the other one is your genetics, your hereditary and your ancestry, that maybe would be important in your race, ठीक है? So this idea of racism this became very interesting for the anthropologists around 18th century. They were interested to study human physical variations. That means जो हमारे अंदर physical changes हैं, right? The color, the nose, the height, ठीक है? The eye structure, right? Different variations that humans have. And there were various attempts that were made to classify the world populations into different categories, but consensus ज़्यादातर हो नहीं पाया. And tomorrow we will see the basis of racial classifications also, right? So criterias mostly use क्या किए थे? Skin color, hair form, nose form, ये सब हमने डिटेल में पढ़ने हैं. These are all the topics that we have to go very into detail. So don't worry, ये कल का टॉपिक है, राइट? बट दीज आर द बेसिक, यू कैन से अगर आपको किसी की रेस डिफाइन करनी है तो दीज आर एंड द बायोलॉजिकल कैरेक्टर्स ऑल्सो ऑन विच यू आर गोइंग टू classify into different categories. But today we are focusing what is race. तो अभी तक हमने समझा race is a biological concept. That means there are physical changes in our bodies, right? There is phenotypical, there is genotypical variations that are there in the human beings, and this is a biological concept that we are trying to study. There is nothing which is related to the concept of racism. But what was racism and how it came into being, we'll study now. So the concept of race gave birth to the concept of racism. And racism जो था ना, it was based on a false belief that factors such as intellect or cultural attributes, ठीक है ना, जैसे हमारी morality या the language, the dress pattern, the food, these are all inherited along with one's physical characteristics like the biological features. So ये क्या बोल रहे हैं इन्होंने, now they mixed up two things, ठीक है. One is the concept of race, which is saying that okay, we have physical differences in us, and one is the concept of racism. Now racism का concept जो था ना, you can say it was very politically motivated narrative also, ठीक है. It suited some people's vested interests, ठीक है ना. So this was a very very exploitative kind of a scenario or a very exploitative kind of a concept that was based on a very false belief कि maybe our intellect, that is our mental IQ or intelligence, and our culture, our values, our morality is also something inherited in the same way as our physical characteristics are. So इन्होंने क्या किया, they mixed two concepts. One is the social concept and one is the biological concept, and it suited certain people's political motives and certain people's vested interests. So these ideas came up, and इन्होंने it did a lot of harm to the humanity as such, ठीक है. So these beliefs are based on the assumption that one group is superior to the other. Obviously हमेशा there'll be a group that is going to exploit the other one, and that exploitation will happen based on certain false beliefs of superiority and inferiority, right? So ये तो all over the world this has been the case, right? Whether it is gender discrimination, तो males believe that females are less powerful, ठीक है ना, and males are superior. Then there'll be racial ideas, ठीक है. Racism is also based on the same concept. Then there is the caste identity, if we talk about that also, in later half of the Vedic era, when it became a very extreme kind of a situation, वहाँ पे untouchables were or the lower caste were discriminated on the fact that they were inferior classes, right? So and then there is class, poor will be exploited in the hands of the rich people. So ये belief, ये हमेशा ये there is always one group that believes that they are superior to the other, and in this case race became that one idea. But and it gave way to lot of things that harmed the humanity. For example, the eugenic movement. हमने बोला था ना eugenics क्या है? We are trying to protect our human population from having genetic load or having any kind of genes that are harmful. So racism में उन्होंने क्या बोला, जो superior genes हैं only they should reproduce and the inferior genes should not. For example, they would say that the slaves or the people who are of a black origin or maybe Indian origin, they should not reproduce, and we the Europeans should only reproduce. ये example है, this is just an example. So ये क्या करेगा, this has brought in the concept of notion of purity of race, or who is inferior, who is superior, and this has made persecution of people बड़ी जगह पे. We saw that in the Nazi Germany, right, Hitler did mass persecution of Jews on this concept only, right? So racism ने बहुत ज़्यादा humanity का loss किया है, right? So leaders from among the European American fabricated the ideas like race, linking them with superior traits, and then they said that Europeans are people who are maybe more superior, and people like blacks and Indians are superior to suit their own interest, because they were the colonizers, they were the people who were exploiting us. So you need to have these kind of ideas, right? Otherwise why would people believe you? So racial biasness किसी भी चीज़ पे हो सकती है. It could happen for religion, language, food, dress pattern, right? For example, if a Shah Rukh Khan is stopped at the entry of a maybe American country, right? Just because he has a name like Khan, and there are many others, ठीक है? So this is what? This is discrimination based on religion. So ये सब concepts जो हैं, whether it is caste in India's case, ये सब racism का concept में you can count. But racism का concept basically तो आया था बायोलॉजी से, दैट इज़ द बायोलॉजिकल डिफरेंसेस. बट कास्ट को भी, जैसे इंडिया के केस में कास्ट हैज़ ऑल्सो बीन, मतलब कास्ट का एक यू कैन से उसका एक्सप्लेनेशन दिया गया था ऑन द बेसिस ऑफ जेनेटिक्स, राइट? दैट मे बी आर्यंस और द पीपल हु केम फ्रॉम द आउटसाइड, they believed that they were superior people, and they made दास जो यहाँ के people थे, the tribal local origin aboriginal people, their slaves, and then they made them the lower caste. ये बाद में lower caste बन गए, and जो Aryans थे maybe वो upper caste थे, right? So there are theories which suggest that caste is also has a basis from the genetics, right? So I hope you are understanding the concept. Now this is just a picture that shows such racial discrimination that can happen around the world, right? Now racism, a social disease. What is this saying? Racism, because it's based on false assumptions, ठीक है? It is based on ideas of prejudice against other people, because they think that other race जो होती है ना, race जो होती है, which is a biological concept, is also to do with other ideas, that how their behavior would be, right? Or how their culture would be, and then they start to discriminate. So examples है जैसे European explorers, when they went to the Hottentot and Bushman people of Africa, they found कि उनका appearance, language, culture, it was very, you can say, simple, right? And उनके लिए it was low, subhuman, so called savage का idea, right? The idea of savage or barbaric to their own standards. So it was a very ethnocentric viewpoint, ठीक है ना? But obviously they believe that way, right? कि because उन्होंने अपने एक यूरोपियन कल्चर को पेडेस्टल पे बिठाया था, that this we have and this is the apex culture that can be there. So they started to discriminate just because they believed in the other way, and different people around the world are different. तो white color उनको लगा कि मे बी जो white skin color है, it's more appealing, it's more attractive. So they mixed all those ideas, right? कि white color superior है, black color इतना superior नहीं है, या फिर हमारी civilization superior है, उनकी नहीं है, right? So these ideas are all the examples of racism. Indian subcontinent में जो उन्होंने हमारे साथ किया, that is also the same thing, right? So these are certain examples, and it has many times implications have been that they have exploited, dominated, and even killed the inferior people. Now refuting the myth of racism. So this concept became very extreme जब हमने Nazi persecution भी देखा. In the Nazi regime, we saw the persecution of mass Jews, right? And we saw the concept of slavery. हमने slavery देखा Africans में, ठीक है? And then there was so much of colonization that happened. So it had to, now we had to come up with some idea to change, to bring a social reform. जैसे casteism जब बहुत एक्सट्रीम हो गया, तो हमारे इंडिया में भी सोशल रिफॉर्म मूवमेंट्स आए, राइट? जिन्होंने साइंटिफिकली रिफ्यूट करने की कोशिश की. सिमिलरली वर्ल्ड ओवर मिथ ऑफ रेसिज्म को बस्ट करने के लिए देयर वर पीपल, एंड द फर्स्ट वन वाज a British born anthropologist known as Ashley Montego. Now he was the student of Francois, ठीक है, and he criticized the concept of race. He argued that race was a social construct. That means ऐसा कोई concept होता नहीं है. It is just made by us. It is a product of perception rather than a biological fact. And he opposed the concept in his classical work Man's Most Dangerous Myth, The Fallacy of Race. So उसने बोला this is one of the most dangerous, you can say, myth that is there in the minds of the human, that some are superior while some are inferior. And he was the chief architect of UNESCO's declaration on human rights, where we said that there is no concept like a race, maybe, right? So he was the chief architect of that. So the UNESCO's statement on race was, it came in 1951. This statement was drafted by a group of scholars, उसमें से chiefly Ashley Montego, and in India it was Humayun Kabir who became a part of that. Even Levi Strauss was a part of that. These were the people, and there were many people from zoology, genetics, anthropology, sociology, who were part of this UNESCO statement on race, and they came up with certain pointers, or the certain, you can say, things that they wanted to say about humans as a whole. First thing they said is all men belong to a single species, that is Homo sapien. So that means there is no differentiation. You cannot say one is inferior, one is superior, because we all are Homo sapien. तो ये जो concept है ना, of making intelligence a part of racism, or color being attractive or anything like that, and making one group inferior or one group superior, ऐसा नहीं हो सकता, because we have all come from a common stock or common pool of people. हमें पता है Africa is the cradle of civilization, and वहीं से हर जगह people have gone or moved, right? So how can you say that one is superior, one is inferior, where we all are Homo sapiens? ठीक है, this is first thing. And if there are any physical differences in humans, that is because there is the role of environment and certain genetic constitution or hereditary makeup of us that creates certain physical differences, which are never, you can never, based on that you cannot say that people are inferior or superior, right? Because ये कोई this is not a concept like हम कुछ different species नहीं है, we are same species. So intelligence, purity of blood, ये कोई concepts नहीं है. Because purity of blood इसलिए भी नहीं है, because you know that सारे humans एक flock of या stock of people से निकले हैं, and they have always interbred. तो ऐसा नहीं है कि people living in the African continent कोई isolated world से आए हैं, ठीक है? They have always Americans के साथ उनका contact रहा है, ठीक है? When they were slaves, तो उनके साथ they have reproduced. Europeans के साथ they have reproduced. Similarly Indians और British ने काफ़ी सारे families हैं जहाँ पे there are Anglo-Indian, Anglo-British communities. So you cannot say कि reproduction has not taken place intercontinent, intergroups, ठीक है? So concept of purity तो आएगा ही नहीं. There is no purity of blood. There is no pure races anywhere, because ये interbreeding has always been there, ठीक है ना? Then national, regional, just let me clear this, guys. Yeah. So the next one says national, religious, geographical, linguistic and cultural groups do not necessarily coincide with the racial groups. For example, Americans is not a race, nor Englishman is a race, ठीक है ना? Because जैसे मैंने भी बोला, Indian subcontinent में जैसे पाकिस्तान, श्रीलंका, बांग्लादेश, इंडिया, भूटान, they all are genotypically similar population, right? तो हम उन सबको एक साथ categorize करते हैं. Even you can say some part of Australia, Africa also, right? So जो race है ना, that is not something which is national concept or maybe religious concept or maybe linguistic concept. It is different, ठीक है ना? So do not make a mistake there. And then most anthropologists no longer try to include mental characteristics as the classification of human races. Now intelligence was made a very important part. उनको लगता था कि Africans या Indians they are low intellect people, right? But ऐसा नहीं है. Intelligence has nothing to do with race. And ये हम पढ़ेंगे जब हम racial classification करेंगे ना, we'll study this also. Then there is no evidence of so-called pure races जिसकी हमने बात की, because interbreeding हमेशा से हुई है, right? With regard to race mixture, the evidence points out to the fact that human hybridization has been going on for an indefinite and period which we don't even know, right? So hence they concluded that all men are equal and thereby all men deserve equal treatment. So this was the declaration, right? And with this we complete our topic for today, that is race and racism. Tomorrow we'll start with the next part of this, which is racial classification. I hope you have understood and enjoyed the lecture, guys, and if you did, please like, share and subscribe. Thank you.